Let's do it. We started this collection of messages last week called Resurgence. We streamed our service from Redmond. I'm so excited to pick up this morning to start this. I feel like God has this word that's just been burning in my gut. Last night I was preparing, going through my notes, and I just felt like, man, it's just good. So I hope that you'll go with me this morning. If you choose not to go with me, then there's some Convoy of Hope information in your seat back in front of you. You can read that. We got a new program design, so you can read that if you want. But it's going to be good. I'm excited. The word resurgence means this. It's an increase or revival after a period of little activity, popularity, or occurrence. In this context, it's how we take our lives and we start taking ground in our life and in our faith and in our leadership. And what I want to focus in on for the next few minutes is the latter. I want to focus in on our leadership. How do we move forward in our personal leadership? And maybe your first thought is, I'm not a leader. It's not something that I do. But I am a firm believer that someone is always watching. You've probably heard me say that before. I am a firm believer that someone is always watching us. Someone's looking at you. Someone's paying attention to the moves that you make. We all have areas of influence. The question is, what are those areas of influence going to produce? If someone is looking at you, what are we producing based on our leadership? We're looking at this book in the Bible called Titus. It's written by a man named Paul, and he's writing a letter to a guy called Titus, and it's a very short book of the Bible. It's a very short letter. It's 3 chapters, but there's so much packed into this on leadership, on being leaders. Titus is leading a group or a community of churches in an island called Crete. Crete is kind of the underbelly of Greece. It was a very terrible place. No one liked it. It was just a bad, immoral place. Paul refers to one of the prophets from Crete who calls the people of Crete liars, evil beasts, and slow bellies. That's the Bible really hits home sometimes, right? Insult of insults. But it says that. It's coming from one of their own people because it's just not a great place. And Paul's writing this letter to Titus, who is stationed in Crete. And in Crete, Titus has this responsibility to build up elders in the church. He's building up leaders within these churches. He's building up leaders in the churches that are in the middle of a very, very terrible place, which makes Titus all the more relevant in our culture and in our lives and with the people that we're leading. And that's not to say that we live in, the underworld of our world, or a terrible, terrible place. I love America. Thank God for America, right? It's the best country in the world. But at the same time, how do we live out our faith the way that Christ intended us to live out when we're surrounded by kind of darkness and some pretty heavy stuff? And we look around us, and again, not that this is just a horrible place, but we're surrounded by violence and division in our country and mass shootings, which seem to be all the time. And I feel like suicides are popping up all over the place, and sexual immorality and all of this stuff. And at the same time, we're supposed to live these lives of faith the way that we're intended to live, the way that God called us and Christ called us to live them out. And it was the same for Titus. So Paul writes this letter to Titus and begins to answer some of these questions. How do we live out our faith? How do we raise up leaders? How do we enable our leadership in a world that is relatively dark? Paul takes the first part of his letter and he kind of lays a foundation, and he explains who he is. This is Paul. I'm writing you a letter. And he lays a foundation for what's ahead. And in verse 5, he says, the reason I left you in Crete. Anytime anybody says that, it basically lays the foundation for everything. He says, the reason I left you in Crete was that you might put in order what was left unfinished and appoint elders in every town, as I directed you. All through Scripture, we see these examples. All through the Bible, we see examples that are set up for us and for us to model our life after. And Titus is a perfect example as Paul reaches out to him and he says, your job is to finish what is unfinished, to lead leaders. For most of us, our first reaction is, that's not me. I'm not a leader. And I believe that you believe that, but I don't necessarily think that that's completely accurate. You might not ever end up on a stage. You might not ever end up, running the company, but every single one of us has an area of influence. Someone is watching. And in the spirit of resurgence, in the spirit of reviving something, awakening something inside of us that is previously asleep or lacking activity, how do we move ahead in our faith? How do we move ahead in our life? How do we move ahead in our leadership? How do we ensure that we're growing in such a way that we can be used the way that we are supposed to be used? Because that's what all this is about, right? That God has called us to something and we have this privilege, this honor to do something that God has called us to do. God has unleashed this vision on us, and he's simply waiting for us to respond to the calling that he's given us. What an honor we have to do what God has called us to do. The problem in leadership is we spend so much time avoiding it. We don't think that we're leaders, so maybe we're apathetic towards it. We choose not to do it. Maybe we just think that that's not me. I'm not a leader. And then sometimes we actively avoid it. Here's some reasons why. Number one, leaders take too much heat. Leaders take a lot of heat. Look at the current climate of our country. Look at what's happening in our country's leadership. Look at what's happening in political offices. Just as an example, leaders take a lot of heat. Why wouldn't we avoid leadership? Right? We avoid leadership a lot of times because all of a sudden when we get in front of people, when we get into the spotlight, we start to understand that the spotlight is a very dangerous place to be. That's where a lot of criticism comes into play. It's where people say things that hurt and break us down. Leadership is a very, very difficult place to be. We see it all the time. We see it in business. We see it in politics. We see it in the church. We see it in entertainment. I read this article this week about a K-pop star, Korean pop star. Don't ask me how I got into this. I don't read a lot about Korean pop stars, but somehow I found this article. And there was this K-pop star this week that took her own life. Committed suicide this week. And I was reading this article, and kind of the quote that was highlighted or pulled out was somebody saying that this was not suicide, it was murder. And it was murder based on the comments that were continually put at her and attacked her. This person stepped into the spotlight, and as a result of the spotlight, it opened her up to criticism and hate and anger. And we see this stuff all the time because the leadership is a very, very difficult spot to be in. And yet, families don't get healthy, businesses don't flourish, people don't come to know the love of Jesus without leadership. We have to have leadership or things don't progress. Here's the second thing, we don't feel qualified. We avoid leadership because we don't feel qualified. Let me give you a list of some unqualified people. In the Old Testament, there was a man called Abraham. Abraham had a fear of man, and yet Abraham would go on to be referred to as the father of Israel. He would be referred to as the father of the New Testament church, of the church that we are a part of. They wrote a song about him. It's called Father Abraham. You know it? Father, you know? There's a lady, a woman in the Old Testament named Rahab. She was a prostitute, living in the city that was about to be destroyed. And she provided refuge for these spies that came in. And because she provided refuge for these spies, God spared Rahab's life. We're talking about being unqualified. Rahab was a prostitute, and all of a sudden she's on God's radar. And not only that, her story doesn't stop there. Rahab goes on to marry an Israelite. She marries this man from Israel, and they have a son called Boaz, and Boaz marries Ruth, and they have children, and they have children. And all of a sudden we get to Jesus. You have this prostitute, Rahab, and you follow her lineage down all the way to Jesus Christ. Talk about unqualified becoming qualified, right? You look at a guy called Matthew. Matthew was one of Jesus' disciples. Matthew was a tax collector. Tax collectors were criminals, and they were cheats. And so one day Jesus shows up at Matthew's tax collection booth, and it was questionable at best. And yet Jesus said, "Follow me." And Matthew follows him and never looks back. Matthew was very, very unqualified. So it begs the question, why would Jesus choose someone so unqualified? See, I think that Matthew was unqualified up until the moment that he met Jesus, and in that moment, something happened to qualify him. I mean, if we're being honest, I think all of us are unqualified to an extent. I'm unqualified to be a parent. Trust me. I'm unqualified to be a pastor. I'm unqualified to stand in the presence of God, and yet God sent his son to die on a cross to give me access to his presence. There's a qualifying process that occurs when we meet Jesus. We're not unqualified. We don't understand how qualified we actually are, right? Here's number 3. Come on, this is good stuff, right? We are unsure of the need. We're unsure of the need. So much of our life is spent in this mentality that someone else will do it. We live out a life that says someone else is going to do it. Here's what I've come to learn. You are someone else. I am someone else. Someone else will do it, and I want to be the someone else. I want to be the someone else that fills the need. Someone else is going to do it. The question is, are we willing to lead the charge in it? I said earlier, next week is this One Day to Feed the World initiative. The idea is that we take one day's wage and help transform a kid's life. What if everyone, and millions of kids have been affected by this organization in the last 25 years. What if everyone said, someone else will do it, right? What if these kids that have not eaten for 3 weeks, what if everybody said somebody else is going to do it? What kind of impact would that have? We don't lead the charge because we're unsure that there is a need. The need is for you. The need is for you to step up and be a part of something that's happening around you. Here's number 4. We avoid leadership because we are not sure if it makes a real difference. Let me go back to what I just said. So we're going to feed a kid. You know how much it costs to feed a kid through this organization? It costs $120 to feed a kid for an entire year. Not only that, to give them clean water and education, $120. Sometimes I get nervous that I can't feed my kids for $120 a day, right? I mean, they just pound applesauce, right? I'm serious. It's weird. Helen Keller said, "I am only one, but I am still one. I cannot do everything, but I can still do something. I will not refuse to do something that I can do." Sometimes we don't have the ability to do it all, but we have the ability to do something. But we avoid this because we can't do it all, so we choose to do nothing. We will never truly begin to make a real difference until we recognize that we're a part of something that's bigger than ourselves. And when we step into that, we begin to act differently. Matthew wrote this. He said, Jesus went through all the towns and synagogues towns and villages teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without shepherds. Then he said to his disciples, maybe you've heard this before, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send workers into his harvest field." Jesus goes town to town, healing and doing miracles. He looked out and he saw compassion, and so he did something. But then he said, we need more people to do something, right? There's this incredible need. We need more people to lead the charge. I think that we need to stop paying attention to what we're unqualified for, what we're scared of, what we refuse to do, and start paying attention to the fact that we can elevate our level of influence. We do that in where we're at right now. It doesn't matter where we were yesterday. It doesn't matter where we're going to be tomorrow. Where are we at right now, and how can we begin to elevate that level of influence that we have in this moment? What's so cool about it is this sliding scale. You and me are on different levels of influence. You and the person next to you are on different levels of influence. So you figure out how you can elevate your level of influence in the spot that you're in right now, in your situation right now. Here's some thoughts how we do it. Number one, we start with home base. Before we can ever figure out how to outspread our leadership, we have to consider what's happening at home. Let's go back to Titus. Paul commissions Titus to go and work on leadership in these churches. In verse 6, he says, "An elder must be blameless, faithful to his wife, a man whose children believe and are not open to the charge of being wild and disobedient." For a lot of us, we hear that and we think, well, I've messed up, or maybe my kids aren't serving the Lord. Maybe there's some disconnect that disqualifies me. I don't think that Paul is referring to the perfect family. I don't think Paul is writing this letter with a family in mind that says you need to be like these people because these people have not messed up. These people are flawless. They've not screwed up at all. I think that he's saying good home leadership moves in that direction. That there is this ability and this desire to seek a home life that models a home life that Christ would have for us. Mom, that's your responsibility. Dad, that's your responsibility. Husband, that's your responsibility. Wife, that's your responsibility. Does it mean that our marriages are free of issues? Not at all. Not at all. Does it mean that our kids don't sometimes go off the track? Not at all. What it means is that we're seeking the wisdom that God freely gives to us to get better, to lead our people the way that our people should be led. Prepare your home in not only a way that you see great success from the leadership that you're doing, but you're producing people that are going to see great success from their leadership. Raise your kids to be leaders. Work on your spouse to be leaders, to do something incredible. Learn how to lead with love and kindness and authority and vision. Something powerful can come out of it when we begin to understand that our home base has a value, and before we can conquer anything else, we have to fix what's in our home. Move that ball down the field. Here's number 2. We confront our dark side. Paul goes on, he says, not overbearing, not quick-tempered, not given to drunkenness, not violent, not pursuing dishonest gain. I don't know why Paul chose those dark elements specifically, why he chose those words specifically. I don't know what was going on in Paul's head to use those. Those are very specific things that Paul lists. He says the leader's not overbearing, he's not quick-tempered, he's not given to drunkenness, not violent, not pursuing dishonest gain. There's a German phrase, it sits in Leben. And what it means is situation in life, and it's used in biblical criticism in a way to say what's happening in Scripture is happening in their situation. And we might not understand every element because we're not a part of their situation in life. And so we look at this and we don't necessarily know why specifically Paul is saying these things. Most likely, Paul understands that Titus is stationed in this city where these people are dealing with being overbearing and quick-tempered and drunken and violent, and they pursue dishonest gain. And we can look at that, and we don't necessarily know why Paul chose that specifically, but we can know that we can apply it to our lives and our leadership. Look at it, overbearing people. Are you somebody that has to control every situation? Do you get angry if things don't go as planned? Life is filled with situations that don't go as planned, right? Come on, I think we know that. Life is filled with situations that don't go as planned. The battle with our overbearing mentality comes in the fact that we sometimes have the inability to recognize this massive gap between expectation and reality. And what happens in between expectation and reality is faults and failures and missteps. Do we have the ability to be okay when we can't control those missteps, those faults, or those mishappenings? Or does it lead us to the next thing? He says quick-tempered. James 1 says, everyone should listen much and speak little. He should be slow to become angry. A man's anger does not allow him to be right with God. That's a big statement. That's a big statement to say that I cannot be right in the presence of God if anger controls me. Are you in control of the way that you react towards things? We all miss on it. I don't think any of us are flawless at it. The other night I was doing some parenting, right? and we were having some bedtime drama. I'm a firm believer that parenthood is 50% love and affection and 50% bedtime drama. And so we're having some bedtime drama with one of our kids, and it had gone about an hour. Like, it just kept going, right? This happens probably every 6 to 8 weeks. We love sleep in our home, so we don't deal with it a lot. But about every 6 to 8 weeks, I keep it on the calendar. And so we're having these issues with the kid, and she just kept coming upstairs, and we're threatening her, right? And it gets to that point where it's like, one more time, and we give you up for adoption. Like, she had pushed us that far. And you can have her. And I'm just joking. Ooh. I've lost control. So the other night we're having these issues, right? And it had gone about an hour, and we're getting stern. We're like, this is the last time. Like, we don't want to see you up here again. And so she goes and she's throwing a little fit downstairs every 6 to 8 weeks. And we're laying there and we're watching TV, and we can hear this thing happening downstairs. That's how bad it was. And so Shayna says, you should probably go deal with this. They won't like what happens if it's me. I'm the cool, calm, collected one in the relationship. And so Shayna has me go downstairs, which was not wise. And usually I am. I'm pretty cool and calm and collected. But I go downstairs, and this fit had become destructive, physically destructive towards things, which that's when it gets me. So I'm looking at everything around me, figuring out how I can deliver the biggest blow, right? And I grab her tablet, her device for watching shows. And you want to get them where it hurts? That's it. And so immediately I'm like, this is gone. This is gone for good. You'll never have it again, right? And as this is happening, it's in both hands, and I can feel it start to bend in my hand. And I hear just like the movement of plastic in my hand. And I pull back, and I say, okay, maybe I'm overreaching. I set the tablet down, and I give her a hug, and we end. And that was the end of it, right? The hug ended it, not the fury. And and here's the point, right? We react wrong a lot, right? We as humans react wrong. We act wrong a lot. But are we crafting our ability to get better at it? Paul says, don't be quick-tempered. Are we quick-tempered? Yes, we are quick-tempered. But are we gaining the ability to be better at it? Are we working on our ability to be better at it? Are we developing skills that will prevent us from going too far? He goes on and he says, don't drink so much to give yourself over to drunkenness. He says, don't be violent. Don't figure out ways to gain dishonestly. Find ways to work out the dark side in your life, whatever the dark side in your life is. There are things that Paul listed that some of us don't deal with. What are the things that you deal with? Lying, cheating, pornography, addiction, lack of self-control. Figure out what it is and begin to work it out of your life so that you can, number 3, lean into your best self. See, God has created us for so much more than that. God has created for so much more than that, and he's called us, and he's waiting for us to respond. He goes on and he says, rather, this is counter to all the things he told us not to do. Rather, he must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. We are created to have a habit of hospitality, to strive for goodness, to figure out how to be self-controlled, to be upright. That word upright means honorable and honest. Leaders are disciplined. Leadership means that you have self-control, control over the way that you react so that you can have your best self, so that you can fulfill this calling that God has on your life, so that you can be the best parent, that you can be the best husband or wife, that you can be the best brother or son or daughter. How do you gain control? learn your schedule. Learn how to control your schedule. If you don't determine your time, someone will determine your time for you. Learn how to control your schedule. Learn how to calendar better. Learn how to devote more time to your family. A lot of you are in relationship issues simply because you've not worked out your schedule. Gain control through your schedule. Gain control through your money. We master our money, or our money will master us. Right? Proverbs 20:21 says, the wise have wealth and luxury, but fools spend whatever they get. Learn to manage your money in a way that your money should be managed. Gain self-control through your desires. Do you have control over alcohol? Do you have control over the internet? Whatever desire your life lends itself to, do you have discipline over it? What about your words? Do you have control over the way that you speak? Proverbs 13 says, those who control their tongue will have a long life. Paul says, holy and upright. Gain self-control so that you can have the best you that God has called you to be. The best you that people in your life need you to be. Here's number 4. Leaders, let Jesus lead you. Leaders, let Jesus lead them. Are we letting Jesus lead us so that we can lead others the way that we should lead? Paul goes on, he says, hold firmly to the trustworthy message as it has been taught so he can encourage others. A leader holds firmly to the message that's been taught. Why? So that you can do something for someone else. Titus is in this unchurched society that doesn't know anything about Jesus. At this time, Jesus is brand new. The church is just starting, and these churches are popping up, and they're starting to hear the name of Jesus for the first time in history. Right? We've got 2,000 years of experience. These people are hearing it for the very first time. These churches are popping up, and Titus has been commissioned and charged to raise up leaders in the church. And Paul says, pay attention to the message that's been taught to you. You want to lead someone else, pay attention to the word that has been taught to you, so that you can encourage somebody else. There's a job for you to do. It's to encourage somebody else so that you can lead someone else. It's so that you can pull somebody else along with you. But you cannot do it unless you hold firmly to the message that has been given. And maybe you don't know the message that well. Learn the message. Learn this message that Christ pushed so that we have the ability to lead others in it. Your legacy will be what you lean your life into. If you want a spiritual legacy, you care more about what God thinks about you than what man thinks about you. If you want a spiritual legacy, you ask God, what is the work that he wants to do in you? You want a spiritual legacy, it means that the best of your time and your resources and your energy, they're your best gift to God. You want a spiritual legacy, it means that you take your life and your work and your family and you realize that all of it is better when Jesus is at the center of all of it. Your legacy will be determined by the people that you are leading. If you want a spiritual legacy, if you want a good legacy, how are you leading people? I promise you, you are leading people. Are you willing to lead in that way? Let me pray with you. Jesus, thank you so much.